Hi everybody, welcome to my channel Frugalisama. My name's Sam, where I talk about all things dressmaking, and today is day 31 of 100 days of sewing, and today's video I'm going to be looking at sergers or overlockers and whether they are worth the investment or not. But first of all, just like to say thank you to everybody who's been watching these videos. I'm mainly talking about sewing on a budget and giving some hints and tips for either whether you're a new sewer or whether you've been sewing for a while. And today's video is quite pertinent about sewing on a budget because I'm just looking at whether it's worth the investment of buying an overlocker or a serger. So for anybody who hasn't subscribed, if you like this sort of thing, if you could please consider subscribing, and thank you to everybody who's done so far. If you click the bell below, it will give you notifications as to when I post new videos. So I wanted to bring you this video this week because hot on the heels of the Aldi craft week last week, Lidl also have a craft week, and they famously now sell overlockers and sewing machines and lots of other sewing equipment. It's the Singer S010L that's in stock at the moment. Mine is a slightly different model, but I don't think there's a great deal of difference in them. So what I'm going to provide you is with a review of this particular overlocker and whether they are worth the investment, along with some hints and tips of how to use overlockers or sergers in general. On to sergers and overlockers, answering a couple of questions first. What is the difference? There isn't one. A serger is an overlocker. A serger is mostly the US term. Overlocker is the British English term. And essentially what they do is they finish your garments. Some people say to make them look more professional. I would say that depends on your viewpoint. If you look at most ready-to-wear garments, you will see an overlocked edge. This is a t-shirt that I made before that gives you that effect. And with a jersey like this, it's got a certain amount of stretch in it as well. And just to give it more contrast, I've just done it on a piece of denim there. So you can use it on stretch and wovens. General consensus is that it gives a more professional finish to your home or handmade garments. But do you need one as a home sewist? Well, the answer is no, not really. You really don't. I sewed for many years without an overlocker, and there are lots of dressmaking and couture techniques that can finish a garment that actually look more professional, if you like, such as the French seams, which I've shown before. A French seam actually is more of a couture technique, and many people use that as opposed to using an overlocker. And that you would use that mostly on, I have used it on a stretch, but you would use it mostly on woven, mostly on something reasonably lightweight. This is a viscose. You can use them on cottons. If you wanted something for denim, you would generally use a flat lock seam. A flat lock seam is also used on shirts. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. It's very creased because it's just come out of the wash, but that's the effect that you get, and that is generally used on the sides of jeans. Very strong seam, and that's the inside. Let's see if you can see it. So you can see how nicely finished that is, and in my opinion they actually look nicer than an overlocked seam. So additionally, you can bind a seam as well. That's a facing that's actually bound on a boiled wool coat. Depending on how you do it, it's sometimes called a Hong Kong seam if you do it on your seams. It depends on exactly how you finish it. Or on such as this, a boiled wool coat, I've not actually finished these seams, actual seams themselves, off at all, because it just doesn't fray, and I didn't want the extra work and the extra bulk, and I've done it around the facing there as well. So it's all sort of nice around the bits that people are going to see and the inside of the coat. That again, that's personal preference. There's lots and lots of finishing techniques that you can use without an overlocker. So it's down to budget really, and space. Space is a big one, but you need twice as much space if you want to keep it out. Obviously you can put it away, but you still need a cupboard to put it in. Other finishing techniques that you can use without an overlocker are trusty pinking shears. Used these for years and years before I got an overlocker. Check your sewing machine to see if it has a special foot. Mine has this Overcast stitch foot, and it's essentially what it does is it doesn't cut like an overlocker does, but it just does it uses these little brushes to overcast an edge. So yeah, just have a look at your machine and see if you've got that foot. Damn sight less expensive than an overlocker, even if you have to buy the foot. My Janome XL601 does have a specific stitch to do that. So I suppose one question is, why finish your seams at all? And it is just to give your homemade garments, handmade garments, whatever you want to call them, that extra longevity. It gives them an extra bit of strength and an extra bit of longevity. Like the boiled wool one, that seam's not going to fray, it's not going to go anywhere. But anything sort of cotton or that's going to fray, and viscose is a devil for it. Multiple washers will cause it to disintegrate in the wash. Laundry care, it is quite a big thing actually, but you can avoid some damage within the construction of a garment by taking extra precautions by finishing your garments properly. So on top of the fancy seams, as I would call them, like the couture methods such as the French seams, you can pink them or you can just do a zigzag stitch. So the short answer to whether you need an overlocker is no, absolutely you do not. A lot of people use an overlocker just to sew knits and just for finishing, and I will be the first to admit that an overlocker has many, many features, and I am very guilty of mostly using it for finishing garments, but there are so many things that it will do. So I will cover all the different features that it has. I will be specifically talking about this Singer, which is, it rolls off your tongue. It's a 14SH754. This is one that I bought about 6 years ago, and I can quite honestly say that for £129 I've had my money's worth out of this. So just remember, it's at the bottom end of the market. Yes, you can spend a heck of a lot more on an overlocker, but for me personally, this is just a hobby. £129 that I spent on this is about the most that I want to be spending on a hobby. The other thing is I've got nothing to compare it against. So obviously if I had a lovely baby lock, I'd probably think this is rubbish, but this has served me well. So in my opinion, if you're considering getting an overlocker and you can get to the supermarket Lidl while the offer is on, they have gone up to £139 because it's a slightly different model. My personal recommendation is I think they are worth that kind of money for the features that they have. So what features does it have? This particular model is a 4-thread overlocker, but you can actually do 3 threads or 2 threads. And when you unpack your box, you will find this strange little gadget here, which is called a converter. The converter allows you to sew with 2 threads, and it's a question of inserting it into your machine. I will put a close-up of what you do with it. I've never used this. I think it's usually used mostly for sportswear and active wear, where you want a secure seam but a very narrow seam. Okay, so the first step for inserting a converter is to remove your upper loop of thread, which is, in this case, is the red. I've used the colour codes that are within the machine, and turn the dial down to 0. Here's a close-up of the converter. You can see, hopefully, that there's a bit there that's going to go into this hole here from the upper looper, and right on the end of the bar there's a slight hook, and that's going to go into the back of that hole there. It just clicks in, that hook then just goes into that hole there, Once you've got the converter inserted, just make sure that the lower looper thread is just going over the top of that converter, like that. And depending on what stitch you're going to do will depend on what tension and what stitch length and what's sitting down here you've got. So obviously 4 threads is going to be wider than 3 threads, and 2 threads are going to be even narrower. So just by removing a needle, you would just convert it to a 3-threaded machine. And it's up to you which one you remove. You can remove either needles by adjusting your differential feed, either removing a needle or adjusting your tension up and down. You can actually have lots of different stitch varieties within this overlocker. So you've got famously the rolled hem. You can do gathering stitches on an overlocker. You can do like a lettuced edged hem on an overlocker. So that's adjusted by your differential feed. You can do something that looks a bit like a cover stitch. They call it a faux cover stitch, and you can actually do pin tucks with it as well. I've never been that brave, and you can actually do a blind hem on an overlocker as well. I only really use this for finishing edges, but it's got so much more potential really. I've had this 6 years. The only thing I've had to change are needles and my knife. And I'll come on to that a bit later. A couple of other features that it has: you can remove this part of the overlocker, the bed here, and that provides you with a free arm. And with that, you can sew cuffs. So like on here, you can actually finish a cuff off, or your sleeves, or anything circular really. Really useful, especially if you're doing children's clothing. The cover of this comes down and it reveals. I'll put a close up in for you. It's all colour coded of how to thread it. It is explained in the booklet, but what I would suggest that you do, I'm not going to show you how to thread this today, because it would take too long, but what I would suggest that you do is pop on over to Jamie Kemp's video. I'll put a link to it below of how to thread this up. But it is exactly as the guides show you. It's all colour coded. The trickiest bit is getting your I think it's your lower looper threaded up. That's the trickiest bit. The rest of it, the needles and everything else, that's quite easy. What I've done today is I've put in different colours that signify the colour codes in there. I don't normally have 4 colours on. So it also has the ability to raise and lower the blade as well. So really don't want something cut in. You can actually raise the blade so that it doesn't get in the way and you don't accidentally cut something. So the one that's available in Lidl at the moment, which I'm guessing is exactly this, but it's been slightly upgraded. I also think that this model that I've got is the same as the Singer ProFinish that they seem to have in the US. I think it's the same model. I've had a look at somebody reviewing the ProFinish online and I can't see any different at all. Singer used to have a really good reputation. I'm not so sure that that is still the same. However, if you were buying a new one from Lidl, it comes with a 3-year warranty, and I think that's about as much as we can hope for these days. Like I say, I've never had any problems with mine. A couple of things that you need to know. You need to know is the threading order is really important. It doesn't go from right to left or left to right. You must start from the middle, which is on this particular machine, it's the red one. So you've got 4 dials. You start from the middle right, then go to the right, then go from the middle left, which is then your needles, and then to the far left. And as long as you keep to that order, you shouldn't get into too much trouble, but don't try and thread it up out of order. If your needle thread for whatever reason breaks, you need to unthread the needles, rethread it, rethread the loopers and then rethread your needles. It's a pain, I know, but it's just one of those things. And this is where, like your baby lock, I think it is, come in, because it's called air threading, and that threads it all through. But you pay a lot more for those, so it depends on how good your eyesight is and how patient you are. I think us sewists are known for our tenacity. So my first tip is get it out of the box. Don't be scared of it. Don't sit there with it for 3 years until your warranty runs out. Get it out of the box, give it a good play with. I'll show you how to attach the threads without rethreading it, so then you can have a play with it first. But the second tip is it's really, really important to learn how to thread it, because there's going to come a time where it will become unthreaded and you can't do the tie-on method. And there's nothing worse than being in the middle of a project and trying to learn how to thread it up. So spend a wet Sunday afternoon just having a play with it and seeing what it does and how to thread it. That's my second top tip. Okay, so just snip your thread towards the cone, leaving it threaded through the guide at the top there. Remove your old cone, replace it with the thread that you want, and very simply tie it in a knot, as tight as you possibly can. Once you've tied it in a knot, check it, both ends, the old and the new, make sure it's not going to go anywhere, and then snip off that excess there to as short as you can. Go along all the threads that you want to change. You might not want to change all of them at once. Make sure that your tension dials are set at 0. Having these tension dials set at the lowest setting is most important, because you've got to get those knots through these tension dial discs that are here. And you can either hand wind it through, which is slow, but it's a bit less scary if it's all new to you. You'll see they'll feed down nice and slowly. Gently pull on your thread that's coming through. You can see that there, and gently pull in. Or you can press a foot. Now you'll notice on my machine that I've got the cover down. I believe on the later models you're not able to actually press a foot down whilst the machine's open, but I wanted you to be able to see it come through, and you can do that on there. It's okay, I've got no small children. We're safe. I don't suggest you do this when there's small children about that can get little fingers in there. So you can see it now, it's coming through. The red and the yellow are coming through the guides that are marked red and yellow, and the only one that you probably won't be able to get through all the way is the green one that's on my right needle. And what I do with that is I just gently crank it through, and just a little tug on it might bring it through, or you might have to rethread. It depends on how big that knot is. It's actually come through on this one. I'm just going to manually thread the left needle just to show you how that's done. So all your threads need to be coming through this upper thread guide here, and then they all start at the back, and you hook under that hook there, and you just need to make sure that your thread is going through that guide there on the top. And then back round to the front, and you just follow everything that's got a blue dot on it. So under that big hook there, through this one with a blue dot here, making sure that it catches on the guide at the back so it doesn't just slip out. And then back through these needle guides here, and then thread it. It's actually easier to thread the needle without this blade in the way and with the depressor foot down. This is where your tweezers come in handy. So the important thing to remember when you're threading any of these manually is all the threads come underneath the foot. And just give it another quick go. And that's all your 4 threads. You just need to remember to make sure to reset your tension dials to whatever tension you need. 3 is about average. My third top tip is you don't actually need to use the Serger cones. I've seen a few videos that say you must use good quality thread. I've used the cheapest I can buy and I've never had a problem. They are potentially more linty. I don't know, is it? I don't know if this has come off the market or if it's come from Lidl. Lidl also sell the cones 2 for £2. Yeah, I've seen a lot of that. They don't actually say what defines good quality thread. I've really never had a problem with it. And by the same token, I don't always use cones. That's just a big reel of cheapo thread that I've got from my local market. So the next tip is make sure that when you put your cone, if you're using a cone, the machine comes with these. Now they look different on different machines, but this particular one looks like this on mine. And the temptation is just to put it on there and then put your cone on top. And sometimes it rattles about. Make sure that you put that into the cone and then put it on. It stops it rattling about so much. Next tip is that you don't actually have to. I've talked about it's a 3 thread and a 4 thread or a 2 thread overlocker, but you don't actually have to have your both needles threaded up. If you're only using it for overlocking, I tend to only ever use it on 3 threads. You are supposed to take the needle out that you're not using. I don't, but you know, I don't always follow the rules. But taking the needle out means that the needle's not piercing your work, so it's okay if it's within the seam. But if it's not going to be within the seam, it's probably good practice to take that extra needle out. And it saves thread, because obviously if you're only sewing with one needle, then it saves thread. More often than not, if I'm sewing with a jersey, I will actually sew it on my machine first. I don't tend to use my overlocker to sew with. A lot of people do. That's why they're so popular, because especially for jersey, you can usually whip something up in an hour if all you're doing is using your overlocker. So the next tip is machine needles. You do need to change these. I was a long time. In fact, I probably didn't change these needles until one broke. And you can get specific overlock needles for it. You might notice on there it's a bit vague. I'm assuming they're universal needles. If you're going to be using your overlocker for knits, I would get, if you can, ballpoint needles. My next tip is to watch out for pins, or avoid using them at all if possible. This is another lesson learned by me. If you get a pin too close to this blade, it's an awful job to get it out, and you will damage your blade, and that's why this blade has been changed. But I use these clips now, if I can remember, or these are the smaller ones. You just can't sew through them. The pins will cause a lot of damage. If you can't avoid using pins, or you've only got pins, make sure that you pin as far away from the bit that you're sewing as possible, and pin it that way as opposed to that way, which is the way I usually pin, just so that you've got more of a chance to see it coming and be able to pull it out, and it's more likely to get trapped that way. So my next tip is what to do with the tails when you've finished serging a hem or a side seam usually, or something like that. Just get a needle, thread it through something with a large eye, and then just bob it back through there, as far as you want. You can weave it in and out as well if you want, but it's fine not to. And just thread it back in so it comes back there. Snip it off. And if you've got fray check, you can put a dab of fray check on there It really isn't necessary. I'll be honest, it's very rare I do this. 9 times out of 10 you can just sew back over it and it secures it okay. But yeah, that's the official way of finishing it. The fray check's not really necessary, and if you don't go out and buy some just to do that, I don't think it's necessary at all. And my last tip is for unpicking seams. Now, the trick is never to finish a seam until you know that the garment's going to fit. Otherwise, unpicking these, it's not fun. So either take a small pair of embroidery scissors or your seam ripper, and rather than if you try and unpick, try and do this so you can see. All you do is go across the looper threads here. All it does is unpick that particular one, that looper thread, and you still got to unpick the other looper thread and the 2 lines of stitching. So what you do is you unpick the lines of stitching first. So if you've got, and that's another good reason for only using 1 needle in your overlocker rather than 2, because you've only got one line of stitching to unpick. But once you unpick those lines of stitching, it releases the overlock stitches. Okay, so to unpick these stitches, this is your right needle stitch. You're just going to go in, intermittently break a stitch along that line. Probably don't need to do them quite as close together. And then go in the middle there, pull them out like that. And then to find your left needle stitch, you just need to go down the V of the looper, and again intermittently break those stitches. Just going down the V and doing the same. Just pulling them out, going in the middle and pulling them out. And you can see there immediately how the looper threads just spring off like that. And you just go all along as far as you need to go. So my final tip is back to thread again, and you don't have to use a different colour for every project. I personally like to, and that's one of the reasons why I use these sort of cheaper cones like this that I've picked up from the market. If you're going to be sewing such as a jersey top like this straight onto your overlocker, ideally do that with 4 threads. So your left hand needle really needs to be the colour of the garment that you're sewing, because I will show you here on this. This is actually a remnant of this. If you pull apart enough, you can actually see the blue of the thread there. Whereas if I'd done that in white, you wouldn't be able to see it so much. My tension's not brilliant on here, to be honest, but you would still see that even if my tension was perfect. So that's the only one that really needs to match. A lot of people use either grey, or they buy the colours that they use the most. I have black cones, I have navy cones, I have red cones, and I've got a pale blue cones, as you can see there. And then the rest, I just buy usually 3 of these. They're usually 3 for £1 on my local market. I've got a Gutermann there because I didn't have anything in yellow, and that you can use those on there. They're absolutely fine. The thing I would avoid is the really, really big cones of these. I find them to be just a little bit heavy, and I think it affects your tension. That's just my personal experience. I might be wrong on that one, but that seems to be what happens with mine. Oh, and just one more thing is, this machine and most Singers come with these tweezers. Make sure that they're on hand all the time because they really are necessary. I don't use tweezers in normal sewing, and these came with this machine, and they're invaluable. They're invaluable for taking your needle out. I have seen a video actually where there is a little gadget for holding the needle, but that's another thing about this machine is taking the needle in and out isn't as easy as it is on my sewing machine. You need a little screwdriver, which I believe it should come with. It's a while since I bought it, but I'm fairly sure that this is a screwdriver that came with it, as you do need that for removing your needles. You really need something to grab hold of your needles when you're unthreading the needles, to stop them dropping into the machine, because it will be difficult to retrieve them, shall we say. The other thing is, this machine will operate with this cover off. I think the later machines don't. And my very final tip is clean your machine. I think this is one that came with this. It could have come with a sewing machine, but they definitely come with a cleaning brush. Mine's not so bad today, but just get all the lint, go in, get all the lint out. Ideally, after every project. I've got an old paintbrush that I also use for it, which I find equally as good. But do not ever use anything that blows anything back into your machine. I've heard of people using compressed air on both machines, overlockers and sewing machines. Don't ever use that on your sewing machine. You don't want anything blowing back into your machine. You can use them in a vacuum to bring it out, but yeah, these are more than sufficient. So to conclude, is an overlocker worth the money? It has been for me. I've definitely got my money's worth out of this, and it speeds up your sewing as well. So if you can afford one and you've been thinking about getting one and you've wondered whether the Singers are any good or the cheap end of the Singers, again, mine's a different model to the one that's available in Lidl this week, but to all intents and purposes, it's going to be exactly the same. So if you can get one, they are like rocking horse poo. So if you can get one, you're very lucky. Let me know below if you've been able to get hold of one, and if you've had a play. I will leave links below to the videos that we're talking about that help you with the setup. Okay, that's it from me today. Thanks for watching, and I will speak to you later. Bye.